Yeah, let's go for another call, though. We got David from Venice Beach. David, welcome to Clean Radio.
Hi.
Hi,
Hey, David, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Do you have a question for us, or?
Yeah, I guess a two-part question. I was wondering in UK, how do they address the treatment or recovery for people that are in custody there? And the other part of the question was what their thoughts were in regards to the change in legislation of the three-strike law over here in California, the impact it'll have on us over here as far as the recovery community and treatment providers.
So
they don't
know the three-strike law.
So they're looking at us. Explain what the three-strike law is.
The three-strike law was that if you get 3 felony convictions, you basically got life in prison. And they've tried to take nonviolent crime out of that equation so that people don't get, if you're busted with felony possession of drugs 3 times, you're not going to necessarily get life in prison. And they had mandated license or sentencing.
So if you had 3 felonies for marijuana, that was it.
So the first part of the question was really, how do people get in? What was it exactly? I'm sorry, David.
How are sobriety? How do they with criminals? Right, David.
Yeah, how do they provide treatment or provide recovery for people that are in custody or getting out of treatment?
That's a great question for Mark, right?
I'd love to know how we do it.
This is right up Mark's alley.
It is indeed, yeah. So basically, what used to happen in the UK, if you were sentenced to, you were in prison, then that was one of the primary routes, paradoxically, that you would achieve abstinence-based recovery, because you would go in. So a place like Liverpool has got the fastest growing network of Narcotics Anonymous meetings anywhere in the world, with the single exception of Iran. Clearly the UK recovery movement is at its heart. The contemporary one is a working class thing. People who speak like me, and though it's difficult to understand.
Is NA bigger there than AA?
No, but NA is growing faster in places where there is accessible treatment, 12-step treatment, Liverpool. And then when people go into treatment in Liverpool, they're going into family recovery. Whole families go in. It's the nature of some north of England families. But in terms of custody, it used to be the fastest way into abstinence-based recovery was often via prison.
Would people get picked up on possession, or were there actual, we have very strict drug laws stemming from Rockefeller, and then Nixon put, marijuana on Schedule 1, so right up there with heroin and cocaine.
If you get arrested in the UK for an acquisitive crime, in other words, theft, for example, you will be mandatorily tested for a Class A drug. And if you automatically, and if you are positive for heroin or cocaine, and that includes crack, obviously, then you will be required to enter treatment.
And it's just those 2 drugs?
Just those 2 drugs, just heroin and cocaine, yeah.
That's one of the questions, we've talked about a lot, is the absence of meth in the UK is kind of...
Ketamine is the big one.
Ketamine's big.
But in terms of the question, it's a great question, because now, if you go into custody, into prison, you are likely to get on methadone maintenance in prison as well now.
So now they're just continuing the cycle in prison.
Yeah, and the challenge from speaking as somebody who works for the National Health Service is that's seen to be a big success in terms of reducing deaths on release, on immediate release from custody, because there was 7 times more likely to die
because they go out and shoot up the same amount as they did before without realizing they'd reduce their tolerance.
Yeah, when you leave a British prison, you end up, if you're homeless when you enter a British prison, you leave with £45, which is about $100.
Right.
And a lot of people would spend that $100 on heroin and would inject it within hours of leaving the prison, and sadly many would die. So the point of giving people methadone maintenance in prison is so that they don't die immediately on release. The 2 points when people died in prison is that immediately when they went into prison and they committed suicide, and then when they left prison and they had overdoses.
So are 12-step meetings allowed inside prison?
Yes. Yeah, and we're trying to get it everywhere.
Because that's a huge thing we have in America that people don't know, is that almost every 12-step group has something called general service, where one of their jobs is to go into prison.
Yeah, we do the same.
The thing I find most interesting about this question, and especially Mark's response, is this idea that we don't actually think about education. We don't actually think about telling people that, hey, you were addicted when you came in, you detoxed here in prison, and there's something called tolerance. And if you go out and shoot up the same amount you did when you came in here, you're probably going to overdose.
We work with over 200 treatment centres, my organisation, and we have a standard operating procedure, standard policy. If any clinic out there is listening and wants a copy of a standard policy for advice on what to say to people when they are self-discharging from a treatment centre, whether that's for alcohol, which is it's just as bad, people when they relapse, it's a big one, a very big one, or heroin or any of this. I think as a professional, I'm obliged. In fact, I believe the NTA and if Mark and NTA and C-Skies it was, had a memorandum of understanding about the standards to deliver to advise service users when they discharge or leave, to warn them exactly of that tolerance point that Andrew's just mentioned, and I think it's critical. If anyone wants a copy of that, just
do you think that would actually work though? That's actually a very, because you're basically saying to an addict, you're saying, I mean, but addicts in general,
you won't know until you do it.
Right.
Yeah, and why deny it? I mean, this whole idea that we deny the problem. We think that they're going out sober, and then it's that personal responsibility thing without giving people good information. It's just, I think, irresponsible in general.
I think there's a care and love thing there though as well, isn't there, Joe?
Well,
you mentioned you care about the people you know,
right?
And you want to do the
well,
best
I think
you can
that's
for
the
them. That's
right,
the critical
right.
point.
That's the critical point.
Whether they're going to hear it or not is
right.
actually,
No, you're right, because one out of 1,000 might, and so you've saved one life. David, was that were we able to answer your question, David?
No, that was very impressive what they do. They seem very progressive out there.
It's
I can give you a real from the world of research. Over a 30-year period, studying heroin addicts in the US, over a 30-year period, it's 50-30-20. Over 30 years in the United States, 50% of heroin addicts will be dead. 30% will still be using, and 20% will be in long-term recovery. In the UK, only 30% will be dead. Probably something like 20%, maybe less, will be recovering. But a big bulk of our people will be on methadone maintenance and on welfare.
So essentially, you're going to be America in 1970, in New York City from 1970 to 1990. That's what it sounds like almost.
Well, what I think is interesting is that there's so much room for reform, both of on all sorts of levels of policy and treatment, and that it's not just to say you have to have good treatment centers, you have to have accessibility, but you have to have government policy that matches up with what you're doing, and then funds the programs that are really working. And it's hard to, some people are saved by the simplest and most rudimentary programs. Even methadone maintenance, a lot of people get on it, eventually get off it, and do okay. And, the 5% maybe that succeed from that method and live, it's hard to argue that it's a total failure. So one thing that I've been trying to do in my conversations with people in Britain and the rest of America is talk about how you can have public health as well as abstinence-based treatment program, and have those two merge together. So the chronic methadone maintenance public health model client that is unable to get off of methadone or unwilling is not left out in the cold because all of a sudden the government decides that no, everybody's going to go abstinence-based. And that, the same thing here in the United States where we now have people that have lengthy Suboxone detoxes, 2 years, 3 years now we're seeing, that we shouldn't necessarily vilify the fact that they have a process to get to abstinence. Abstinence, I believe, should be the goal for everyone.
Right, but the question is...
But it's not necessarily for everyone. And, there still are these externalities, these secondary effects of people going abstinent that aren't ready and then dying from relapsing. So it's important, I think, that we embrace everything that works. AA doesn't work completely for everyone. And we talked earlier about religion, that sometimes that's a big block for people.
And sometimes it saves people's lives. So, I mean, I guess what we're saying is whatever helps.
Yeah. Well, that's I can give you...
David, by the way, thank you for the call.
Yeah, great call.
Thank you.
What we're saying now is basically it's dead straightforward. Everyone can recover. Not everyone will recover. We don't know who will recover. We never know who will recover. Probably never will know exactly who will recover. We've had Project Match. Therefore, though, we need to give everybody every chance. We can't do it for them, but we give them every chance. And then those who stick with the winners,
Are you struggling with an addiction that's ruining your life? Want to have a confidential conversation with a professional that will immediately assist you? Do you suspect a loved one is abusing drugs and would like a free drug testing kit and consultation? KLEAN Treatment Center is standing by right now to help those with addictions and the people who care about them. Call 888-601-6040. That's 888-601-6040. Or go to KLEAN Treatment Center, that's clean with a K, cleantreatmentcenter.com.